Welcome everyone to Oakland Creates Art Makers interview series. Today I'm so blessed to have Darlene. Say your last name. I don't want to.
No worries. It's Oni-Eseleh.
Oni-Eseleh. Darlene Oni-Eseleh. Check it out. I'm gonna have them introduce themselves. I'm gonna share my screen. So if you'd like to do a quick screen capture, it will be available on the screen for you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So hi, my name is Dawline Oni-Eseleh. As my bio suggests, I live and work in Oakland. I'd say I am a huge dog lover. I'm a nature lover. Sometimes it's so hard for me to introduce myself, but I am a lifelong visual artist, and I have been a teaching artist for the past decade or more. And that has been like a really incredible journey of learning and kind of just sharing artistic practice that I really.
Awesome, awesome. So let's jump into some of the more recent things that I've seen you post on Instagram. Are these lino cuts, I'm assuming?
Yes, those are.
So just talk about, what made you want to do portraits in this way and sort of maybe even talk a little bit about how they're made.
For sure. So I kind of call myself a visual storyteller. And a lot of the work that I do has been kind of rooted in uh, kind of talking a little bit about myself, about my family lineage, and really kind of capturing things from photo albums. So a lot of the time I grew up looking at old photo albums and really kind of like learning about my parents, siblings through these albums, like having that kind of connection to history and home.
Right.
And in kind of like subsequent years, in the past close to 20 years, I've been taking kind of a deeper dive into uh what I would say is like my family's kind of like diasporic kind of like journey.
Wow.
So from, different places that we as a family and as a lineage have called home, and then, through like DNA research, through verbal lore, kind of exploring that. So I have been doing these portraits as a way to kind of record this. But some of the other portraits that I do are really based on African diasporic and African American kind of experience, and creating a mirror to show like, a lot of our faces and a lot of our history.
Wow, these are amazing. And it's interesting too because you say that you're a storyteller, which I really connect with, that resonates so much with the work that I've done in the past and continue to do, especially when we talk about our African ancestry. And it's intriguing because when I had a conversation with Asha Sudra, an artist and poet, they did a portrait of I believe it was their grandmother, and they had taken a picture from the photo album and removed the background. And so it looks like you're doing that same thing. So whatever imagery that's in the background, you've just saved the portrait, and it sort of amplifies who they are as a person, especially when you realize that you're consciously doing that. And I think it really highlights more, okay, so what is the story? Rather than just the person, right? And so even though there's nothing in the background, it makes me want to engage more as a viewer, right? To find
Yeah.
out what the background is. And I think that's a wonderful technique that you've developed. Um, Again, can you talk a little bit about how this practice works? Because it's my understanding, right, with printmaking, so you are removing is it linoleum?
Yes.
So you're
So
removing parts and then um the printed part is the negative, and so it's flipped. Or maybe I'm getting that wrong. So can you explain that? Because
For sure. And kind of going back to a little bit of what you described, when I think about like, listening to you speak, it really reminded me of a lot of my earlier work, which probably does not exist on the internet because a lot of it was very much pre-internet, where I was almost doing the opposite. So I was basing a lot of work on either oral history or looking through photo albums, and a lot of the work, the figures were faceless. They were kind of like these stand-in figures, and it was all atmosphere, it was all background. And I think that my justification for working in that way previously was that it was less about the way somebody looked specifically, because I think as a young artist, I had gotten a lot of like, well, that doesn't quite look like so and so, or that doesn't look like me, or who's that supposed to be? And it kind of affected me. So I wanted to kind of take away from having an exact likeness
Right.
to have something that was more about the overall kind of like atmosphere. And so I have in recent years switched more to very like straightforward depictions of people. And so in this process, it is it's kind of a very step by step. I will physically sketch directly onto the linoleum, and just kind of like in a very technical way, there's different types. There is like that classic battleship gray linoleum, which
Hmm.
many might, kind of, it evolved from like floor linoleum. It gets very kind of hard and brittle, and you have to kind of heat it up to get it to move.
Right.
And kind of printmaking material people use to make additions and things like that. And I've been using a soft carve, almost rubber textured linoleum,
Okay.
um, rubber, and that has been ergonomic. So with the kind of fighting constantly against linoleum, it can over time really kind of affect your joints. And I was having a hard time with that printmaker's wrist. So I
Right.
have this. And so I will draw directly onto this carving material and then make that decision whether or not I am going to have um, carve out the highlights. So
Mhm.
whites eyes, wrinkles in skin, highlights in hair, or whether I'm or not I'm going to carve into the face and leave the art outlines out. So it is kind of thinking about positive and negative space.
Right.
A lot of my thinking when I'm doing this sort of thing is sometimes I will use my blocks in paintings. And so there is going to be like color added to the face. And sometimes it's just so that it can have the spirit of a drawing. So I go in, and I make that decision as I'm carving out and really kind of going in. So the sketch is always somewhat rough, and then I'm making decisions as I'm carving it,
Okay.
um, kind of seeing how the form comes in. Yeah, so that's it. And then I take an X-Acto knife and cut out, so it's just a block, because I don't want, I think it's commonly referred to as like a noise, the noise of which I think there are some printmakers I see that create these beautiful uh patterns and designs and have a little bit of that atmospheric stuff in the back of their prints, but I want it to be clean, like almost like a stamp.
Right.
So kind of why I carve very close when I'm creating these.
No, because as you're talking, I'm realizing so the recess is not printed, and so it's the highlighted line, what we would call in drawing. So the positive space is the negative space in printmaking, and I always find that really fascinating. I My work is often compared to printmaking, and I've never quite gotten that connection until looking at your work and maybe making the connection to, like you said, whether you want the details of the eyes or the hair to stand out.
Mhm.
Um, because I feel like have such reverence for printmakers because you do have to think in that 2D as well as 3D, and then you have to think in reverse. So there's a lot going on with printmaking. It's not as straightforward as just putting pen to paper. Although it sounds like we are making similar decisions because oftentimes in pen and ink is which I use, you do have to make those similar decisions, like how much of the detail am I going to show, right?
Right.
But these are just amazing. Let's talk a little bit about. I notice you do flowers and food as well. Are you making similar decisions there, or
I
even?
I am, and it's because so when I started to do these kinds of blocks too, it was a conscious decision to step away from traditional printmaking in the sense of you have a block that you carve out, sometimes depending on different types of relief printmaking, like Japanese printmaking, where you're doing like a kind of like what's it called, a reduction print, right? So
Mhm.
you print, you print one layer, carve away, print the next layer until you have nothing left. And that's a very finite edition, right? And then because the block is stricken, you can never print that again. And similarly with other edition printmaking, you were making, let's say, like, a limited edition, one of 10, one of 50, one of 100, like, 100 prints that are signed and numbered. And then you strike the block and that's it. And so I wanted to kind of get away of the preciousness of that type of work, of like, okay, that's this and there's nothing left, which kind of becomes like a very exclusive product.
Right.
And various elements, again, because there are continuous themes in a story. So when I have these flowers and plants, and I've been looking a lot at California native edible food plants. I'm telling a continuing story because there's a season for California poppies, which are what are on the screen now. There's a season for pomegranates. There's a season for avocados. And that begins to tell a story of living in a specific place. And so I want to be able to continue those elements in different ways rather than saying, like, oh, it's only in this one and then it's done. There might be some things that I'm doing only in there, there's only going to be 50 of these prints, but that is starting to be a little bit rarer in the way that I work, because I want to be able to use these elements in different ways.
Right. And then also, are you drawing from life? Are you setting up a still life? Or are you working from photos? Because I feel like some of these are you have the flower in front of you or the plant right in front of you when you're making the initial drawing. Is how does that work?
So I have a very, and people who might see me on Instagram, especially when looking at my stories, which I've been kind of devoting a lot more time to my Instagram stories, is kind of like I take walks every day. I have a dog, and so that's like, a 3 times a day kind of situation. And then when I'm going on my commute, and I take photographs and document every single thing, like, and not to kind of put a label or like a pathology towards everything, but I have a tendency to, like, one of the things that fascinates me is this idea of like a mental image. So there are some people that, if you ask them to look at an apple, I think about an apple, they'll see like a very specific apple bright in their head. They'll see the bits of dew, and they'll see the texture, they'll almost like smell it, they'll feel the crunch. It's that sharp of an image.
Mhm.
And then so it's a spectrum, and then there are people that have like absolutely um no mental image, and that's like aphantasia. And so, like, it took me a long time because I always thought that mental image was a figure of speech.
Ah,
More on the aphantasic side
okay.
of like, being able to conjure up a mental image. So I think that that might have to do with why I take so many photographs. I'm constantly documenting things, even if it's like the same, the same type of flower. If I see it and it's looking particularly a certain way in a certain light, or whatever, I'll document it. So I have probably, without looking at my phone right now, probably about 100,000 photographs.
No, that's fair. I mean, I'm one of the few people that when I pick up people's phones or they freak out. If I look at my phone right now, I have quite a few photos, but that is just a lot of reference photos. But I actually the opposite of you, where everything is visual, even words, even colors. If you say a color, it pops in my head. If you say a word, that literal word pops in my head. So I'm very much a visual person. If you mention anything, then I'm gonna get a picture of it first. And
Yeah,
yeah, I probably have like 20, 30, 40, maybe 40,000 photos. Um,
yeah.
but not quite 100,000.
It,
um,
so embarrassing because, like,
not at
you would think
all.
artist, and it's like, so all that to say, when I set down to draw something, I am picking from a visual reference. It really helps me to like remember, like really draw from that.
Mhm.
And I categorize everything. So I've got like hands holding flowers. I've got like, just certain place names all organized in folders. And that's how I make my work.
I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, I think awareness, self-awareness is such a valuable tool, to know that about yourself, right? I think if you were trying to force yourself into a different box, then that would be an issue, right? But hey, we're all different, different strokes, different folks. And can you talk a little bit more about incorporating your portraits into your work? Because I've started out doing this, probably in, gosh, I'm gonna date myself, in the early or mid 90s, and then stopped doing portraits with specific reference to places and people and things, especially in my family. And then back in 2020, I started sort of remembering and doing it again in a different format. But I really like what you're doing here with the portraits and the paintings, but specifically how you're bringing elements of the background to tell more of a story. So can you talk a little bit about your portraits?
For sure. And I'm kind of particularly proud of this portrait because was actually acquired by the city of Berkeley, and is in their permanent collection in Town Hall. So
It's
if you're
gorgeous.
ever on the fourth floor of Berkeley City Town Hall, this
It's
portrait.
gorgeous. It's beautiful.
And it's a picture of my mother, and it's a picture of my mother from a formal portrait she had. I think she was 21. And so a lot of these things, these paintings of like family and stuff, again, are from these family albums, and they're kind of like talking about like a moment in time. And it's almost like a conversation with myself. And
Mm,
it's kind of like, this memory. And the title of this is That Was Then. And it kind of is like this, again, conversation I have with myself where I'm thinking about like my mother as a 21-year-old, like way
right.
young now. And her life was fully ahead of her. And she, went to go get this painting, I mean, this portrait, this photograph taken, and like, wasn't thinking about kids and the future and everything to come. And then in the background is from this matching set that my of like what's called a buba and a wrapper. It's like a Nigerian traditional kind of like, and now at this point old fashioned outfit. But my dad got these. An aunt brought these from Nigeria for me, myself, and my mom, a matching one. And so there are photographs of us wearing these.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
it's almost like and that was like maybe a decade after the original portrait was taken. So it's kind of like this based on a black and white photograph of my mom in her younger 20s, not envisioning a future with,
Mm,
this whole other culture. And
wow.
so kind of put these together. And then technically for this, it is I used a gold watercolor ground so onto a wood panel. So it's part of no, what is this? Daniel Smith watercolor. So you can paint on this ground. And so that's watercolor. And then there's acrylic gouache in these layers. So
Okay. I love Daniel Smith watercolors. But no, it's very evocative, and I wanted to say immediately that, oh, this is a traditional African fabric. I wasn't sure of, the location. You're saying Nigeria. It all tracks. It all makes sense because it very much feels like, okay, you're telling a story from the generation before, and then your mom, and then there's a connection to you, obviously. And so hearing that you guys had matching wraps and uh dresses, I'm assuming, bobas or gowns.
yeah, so it's kind of like a shirt, kind of like a simple like short sleeve shirt, or and then like a kind of a wrap skirt that go like
Yeah,
a
because there's different different people call it different things, right? I think my dad is from Ghana, and so I think they're called bobo. Uh,
okay.
but don't quote me on that. But yeah, so I could totally see it. So
No,
it's gorgeous. It's amazing, and it really makes you want to, okay, what is this story behind it? Like I really want to know. And it is funny because I look at pictures of my mom when she's in her 20s, kind of gives me the same thing. Like, what was she thinking about what
mhm,
her future was gonna be before any of us were born, you know?
yeah.
And so this next one, I do daily drawing during Black History Month, and I
Mhm.
haven't done Mae Jemison. I've done other Black women astronauts. Can you talk a little bit about why you're inspired to paint Mae Jemison?
Yeah, and yes, I do. I love your kind of like daily practice and also your practice of drawing folks. So at this time I was doing for Black History a drawing a day and a portraiture. And I'm just like a big space fan.
Mm,
I think, I'm the kind of person I kind of like get little bits of information and I squirrel them away. I've always been fascinated by space. Like, I don't have the math skills or like the inner ear to be able to like think that I could ever be an astronaut. Like, please don't spin me around. I won't make it. Uh, I wanted, so it's like, here's like Dr. Mae Jameson, this like, African American woman in space, a pioneer in the early days or the earlier days. And so yeah, that's kind of the very simple backstory of
So
pain.
so cool because she inspired so many young Black girls. She's amazing. And gosh, off the top of my head, I do believe like reading on about her history and other Black astronauts, she inspired. There's a class like in 96, I want to say, 97. They're like back to back to back classes where all of these Black women decided to become astronauts. And I think she's not given enough credit for that, you know? But in the description box, I'll put the names of all of them because I did draw a couple and I can't recall them at this moment. And talk a little bit more about I'm hoping these are family members. This one looks like Malcolm X, I'm not sure. But yeah, talk a little bit more about these portraits. I found them so fascinating. I did a deep dive on Google and just was so impressed by all of your paintings.
Thank you. And this is actually, it's funny because these were actually when I started to, as you had mentioned earlier, I too very recently started to kind of like not go so into like family stuff. There was something, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know why I just got waylaid, but yes, in any event, started to kind of like try and just think of people in my head and paint portraits like of a different time period. Again, mostly because I feel like African people of African descent across the board and African kind of like just everywhere
Hmm.
are not often depicted in historical ways
Right.
without it being something that is rooted in trauma or
Right.
like a specific thing. And I also do a lot of like portraits of women. And I wanted to kind of like paint figures with these instances that were more masculine, with decorative elements that looked historic,
Right.
and also play around with the mixed elements, as I had mentioned before, of using some of the block prints
Mhm.
or the stamps that I had carved and hand coloring them in as repeating elements.
Wow.
So in these two ways, these are this kind of thing. I was playing around with liquid graphite. So these, I believe, are wood panels that were treated to accept watercolor. So they have a watercolor ground on it. And I want to say that this was kind of like as shelter in place kind of was dragging on and like not to date this video or like, whatever. It has been a big part of our lives in the past. Like, the pandemic era has been a big part of our lives. We're
Right.
close to, and so for some of us, we spent more time inside than some other of us. And so, yes, during that time, I was spending a lot of time getting deep into my practice, working from home, and just like kind of experimenting with these different portrait styles. So that's where this work came from. And this also might have been in February where I didn't want to, because there is a tendency sometimes to recycle
Right. Same
the
color.
same and there was this podcast that I used to love. Oh, it was called The Nod. And I remember one of the like continuing, like, I don't know, almost gags is, I don't know if a gag is like the way, but there's like this continuing kind of like thing that they would call like peanut butter history,
Mm,
because the way that people will often talk about like George Washington Carver, like
right.
the peanut.
For
And so
sure.
when they were making a joke about like the way that like Black history celebrations tend to go, they had like this bit called peanut butter history. But so in thinking of that, I wanted to kind of like the people that we don't know about that we're worthy of celebrating and just kind of like create figures that look like that.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm just really was drawn to I don't know if that's it's kind of a sienna or umber that you're using. Is that watercolor or is that also liquid graphite? And
That liquid graphite, and it's part of, or rather like a water soluble, almost like a Conte. They
mm,
have different like the sienna and like umbers and different colors like that I really, and ochres. And I wanted to have that almost sepia tone that some of the old
I was gonna
photographs.
say the undertone, the sepia tone, and then the burnt umber on top, where the
Mhm.
watercolor is kind of moving and doing whatever it wants on his face is so gorgeous. I'm like, now I really, my good friend Eugene, Randolph Young is using liquid graphite, and I've been a little intimidated. Now I'm like, I'm gonna play with this. I'm gonna
Yeah.
get a couple of colors, and then there's also Maureen Burdock said there's a walnut ink that you can get as well. So I'm gonna just get a few of those. I do reviews on my Patreon, not to plug my Patreon, but I'm gonna get some more of those art supplies that are kind of related. And like you've inspired me just from looking at this to kind of I'm gonna play around with some of these water-based media
Oh,
and
like
and see what I can do because these are just amazing. Especially like the little quiet places you get in the eyes on the one that looks like Malcolm Little with the butterflies.
yes.
So were you said you were purposely wanting them to look similar but not quite that person, right?
Yeah, it was just kind of like because of the way that like, oh, I need to have an image sitting in front of me. I was playing around with like, come on, like you can try to expand your mind and face
Yeah,
based purely on like, where eyes go, where a nose goes. So
exactly.
it's kind of understanding my limits and then also trying to push it to exercise my brain just a little bit. Sometimes you have to push yourself a little bit, or
The
more than.
eyes, you really captured like the luminescence, the little reflection that happens around the pupil in his eyes. So that is amazing. Like I said, I want to try this technique now. Let's
Thank
go to
you.
the next one. So, is this a family member in pink? Because it feels really intimate.
That is, it's interesting. That is not, and I cannot remember if there was a reference, but I was thinking a lot about nurses, and I have a lot of nurses in my family,
Wow.
and this like the uniform, there's like this the badge with the pocket kind of watch that people used to have, and I think I might have been watching a documentary on nurses from the 50s and 60s and just thinking about that lineage in my family, and drew that. So that might be where that came from.
Yeah, and it also just quickly in this moment made me think of the four little girls who lost their lives in the bombing of the church in Mississippi. I don't know why that just flashed in my face. Like that really brought that back to me. Uh,
Yeah,
and then
it's
of
kind of
course, go ahead.
sorry, it's kind of like almost also the same thing that ushers would wear in
Yeah,
pink. Right?
in the
Yeah.
church. Yeah, yeah, the Ursher board, as we would call them. And then talk about Margot. I loved Margot. Amazing, amazing artist, but just a really genuine, awesome, sincere person. Uh, I did find this portrait. To talk a little bit about, your connection to Margot. I think all of us as local artists, if you're in this area, you might, know who they were and have a connection. But this is just the sweetest portrait of Margot Rivera was.
Thank you. Yeah, Margot was such a connector. Many of us knew them and were connected to them, and they were so great at making connections within the art community. They were always putting together an event, drawing people in,
Right.
and they had one of my biggest dreams when because I moved here to the Bay Area almost 2 decades ago. But like when I met them, I was a manager at an art supply store, and one of my biggest dreams was to be do some illustration for Edible East Bay.
Mm,
And if you know Margot, Margot did a lot of illustration
right.
for East Bay, and they connected me, and I was able to do a couple of illustrations, which again, huge, kind of like I got to check something off of my box.
Right.
And so after they passed away, I was like, I had the great honor of being asked to do a portrait of them. um and so that is this portrait. And Margot um was also just such like a lover of food and freshness, and was a fighter, and such a huge member of the community. And so I wanted to make sure I captured them this, and it kind of like brings a tear to my eye because they're such a special person.
Right. I mean, I was very moved when I saw the portrait. I was like, "Oh, we have a connection. We know this same person." And I saw the edible. What is it? The magazine?
Police Bay.
Yeah, Edible East Bay. I mean, they were such a advocate for fresh food and good foods, and just made amazing, amazing illustrations. So I was so happy to see that you had done this portrait. It's a wonderful tribute to them. Okay, so we're gonna stop sharing the screen so we can see your beautiful face and jump into some of these questions. So you said that you have Nigerian heritage, but where did you grow up? Were you born? Where did you grow up?
Grew up in the mid Hudson Valley in New York.
Oh
So,
wow.
yeah, like about 50 miles north of the city. And as soon as you hear the north and the popping out immediately. So,
Nice.
yeah, mid Hudson Valley. Yeah, tri state through and through.
So is that Buffalo, Albany? Where's that?
North. Kind of like mid Hudson Valley is like there's a Hudson River. It's not as north, like, so New York is like such a huge state, right? It kind of goes, well, something like this, and then there's like the city in Long Island.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like it's like meh, right there.
Oh, near Long Island.
Canada, kind of like that, not that far, but it's like, it's
Wow.
it's city. It's one of those kind of areas that sprung up like after people were tired of living in, you know, the Bronx or whatever. And like a bed, I think they're called.
What is it?
I think they're called bedroom communities, but it was semi-rural when I grew up, but it's
Okay.
like it reminds me a lot of like Sonoma County.
And so I asked many of the other artists that I interviewed this question, and I'd love to get your take. Is there something that maybe inspired you, or some instance where when you were a younger artist or even a child, where you were, "Oh, I can make this a career, I can become an artist." Was there one thing you can pinpoint that happened when you were a younger person?
So I remember, oddly enough, I think that one of the earliest memories I had of art is my parents had a book of Andrew Wyeth portraits.
Hmm.
and it was called the Helga Pictures. And I remember I couldn't have been more than 5, but like Helga was this woman that Andrew Wyeth like had painted all of these like very textured, almost watercolory, dreamy pictures. She had wispy blonde hair. And I remember, and I'm so old now, and that is not an insult to King or myself, like just facts is facts, that I don't want to kind of like romanticize something. I don't have as strong as of a connection to my 5-year-old self because
Mm,
I'm at least 15 and a half now. But yeah, no, when I was younger, I remember looking at that book and seeing an adult had made all of these paintings. And I'm like, and that was to me something like some you can just draw as a grown-up. You can just paint and draw and like get lost in one lady. Like, cause I was like, you didn't just her, and just like and have a whole book of it. Like that was like, oh, you could do other things as a grown-up. So I feel like that was probably
mm,
last. And then my parents also had those reproductions of these paintings, and I wish that I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's a specific painting. I think it's one of like the Dutch or like Flemish master paintings, and it's of like a black man. It's probably called like the Moor of like such and such, but it's like, and he's wearing like these. I don't know if it's like that kind of like pointy hat, and
right.
they were I want to say, and I'll probably like kick myself and then like look this up after this interview, but it's like probably something like Three Faces of a Moor or some, it has kind of title. But I remember also too, like they were drawn to that sort of work. And so they would have those reproductions there.
Right.
Just being like, what, like this is something that people can do. It's not just something that your teacher like asks you to do. So those were my very earliest introductions to art as a thing, and I was hooked ever since.
That's amazing. No.